from wherever you are, and welcome to Let's Play Games. I'm John McFarland, Adult Services Librarian for Nashville Public Libraries, and I hope you'll join me in learning or rediscovering some of the more common and uncommon games out there. This time, we're going to go into one of the most popular card games of the 20th century, Canasta. Its Spanish name belies its importance in the Americas, and it's going to show you the importance of organizing and getting decks together super quickly. Let's get stuck in. Before we get started, a little bit of a refresh, or if you're new to card decks, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to know about it. So, card decks all have four what are called suits. Let me go and find them for you. We have diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. So these card decks will all have, in these four suits, a wide array of cards, some numbered and some with faces on them. So it goes in an ascending order. Ace, which is our reference to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then the Jack, the Queen, and the King. So if you're unfamiliar with card decks, Ace can sometimes, depending on the game, be either the low card, the high card, or in some instances, both. But we'll get to more on that in a minute. Canasta also requires the use of a specialty card that you don't always need, the Joker. The Joker card is a wild card, and usually there are two with each deck. One of them has just in black and white, and one of them is usually in color. For Canasta in particular, we're going to need two decks. So it's time I remind, in any card game, one of the most important things, shuffling. And if you're unfamiliar with how to shuffle, what you do, I'm going to be a little ambitious and try and do two at the same time. What you can do is you can hold over and then make a little angle. And see where my thumbs are? These cards are pretty bendable. You don't have to bend them too far, but what you do is you put your thumbs right here and you just let cards go a couple at a time. See how here, I'm trying to make sure I don't lose it, it's a little harder with two decks than it is with one, but with practice you can get there. Notice how you got a little bit of the mixing here. All you do is you work on just folding it in. And then you notice that the deck is a little mixed in together. We're going to need these well mixed for the game that we're playing. So we're going to do it again. Make sure you hold it right where your thumbs are. Release it a couple of times, and sometimes you'll get it jammed in, but that's where you repeat the process multiple times. So after you do an extensive amount of shuffling, I'll shuffle more here in a moment. For Canasta, it functions in two teams. Usually you are going to be on the opposite sides of each other. So player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. So I will move this out here, where now you have 4 players, and let's go ahead and shuffle these. So for 4-player Canasta, what you're trying to do is get a certain amount of melds. What's a meld? It is an organization of cards, and they have to be all matching. So let's find ourselves some 8s. 8s can be as little as a group of 3, so as a reminder, you've got, in 2 decks, since there's 4 suits, there's going to be a total of 8 of these. Now, the way these point structures work is that they function off of a certain amount of points. So let's see. Let me get the 5, 7s. I'll find a little bit of each of these, so that way I can give you some good examples. 2s, I needed those. Let's see, what else am I looking for? This will be a good example to start. So each of these cards, you may want to write these down, or you can find a quick guide for keeping track of the points. But you are going to want to prioritize points as best as you can, while at the same time, even the small cards have values. So the 4s, 5s, 6s, and 7s are worth 5 points each. You notice that I pulled out a red 3, but a black 3, this will be important later, is also worth 5 points. 8s, 9s, jacks, queens, and kings are worth 10 points each. Aces and 2s are going to function as 20 points each. So aces are going to be a high card, as I referred to when we were doing the shuffling. 2s in particular are also important because they are what are called wild cards. So if it's a wild card, it can function as any of the numbers. Wild cards will become important pretty soon. We also have to talk about the jokers. Jokers are worth 50 points each, partially because there are only 4 of them in these 2 decks, and also because of their importance in finishing a meld. So let me get these all together, shuffle them up a little bit better, and then we'll work on the deal. But first, I want to tell you about the development of this game, because oh, is there an international history. We have to talk a little bit about the origin of this card game. It has a divided history depending on who you ask. There's 2 major theories. One, Conquian, which is a Mexican game derived from a Spanish deck, which only actually dealt with about 40 cards rather than the 52 card deck that we're familiar with in a French card deck. And it had its origin in the 1890s, and it pioneered the idea of bringing melds together. There's also Kanlu, which is an Asian version based off of Mahjong, which instead of using cards are used in tiles, which I promise we'll get to eventually. But depending on who you ask, the core idea of melds still existed in both as it developed. Okay, so our deck is now fully shuffled. What I'm going to be doing is dealing out the cards to each player. And I'm going to be dealing 11 cards to each player. 1, 2, 3. All right, so each player has 11. I'm going to put that in the middle. That'll become important in a minute. And normally what you would do is you would hide your cards, but we are going to show them upright. So we're looking for groups of 3 at minimum. So let's see, kings. And it's usually easier to put them in order. I've got 2 10s, which is a good start. And I've got those 3s. Those are going to become important very quickly. So for player 1, we've got some interesting options at the start. We've got the 2 10s and the 2 kings, which may be helpful. Player 2 is a little more lucky with the shuffle out of the gate. Wonder who shuffled these. And you've got some options for melds right out of the gate, as we have 3 jacks and 4 9s. So we're doing pretty well from the start. Somebody was good enough to get a joker at the beginning here. 8, some 5s. Now let's check and see what player 4 has. Okay. So we'll take a quick look around to see who's working with what here. Now, the way this game works is that you are technically playing to 5,000 points, which sounds imposing, but these scores start to add up real quick, and we will get some quality scores here at the end of a round. So we'll look at player 1 here. No meld yet, but at the beginning of this game, because players are just starting out, you only need 50 points total in order to make a meld. So our kings here are worth 10 points each. Our 10s are also worth 10 points each. So we're not there yet. Over here, we've got 4 9s, so we're almost there just off of these 9s alone. And these jacks are worth 30, so we need just one more 9. Over on player 3's side, not a whole lot to make a meld, except for the fact that player 3 has a joker, which means that technically, as long as we have any meld ready to go, we can immediately set down. For player 4, similar instance with these aces right here. So each player has a little bit to go off of. So now let's talk about the nuance. In the beginning of this game, one card is going to be placed. Now, as player 1 was the dealer, play is going to continue counterclockwise. And player 2 is going to have the option to do one of the following. They can either draw from what we call the stock, or do the discard. Now we know here, as it's face up, that the 5 is going to be of no help, but it would be of help to player 3. So at least from the get-go, what we're going to do is give player 2 an initial draw. And it's a queen. The queen is of no help. So they're going to consider what to do with these options. So here's the choice that you're going to have to make after a draw. So we can make these initial melds. And let's say the 5 was of use to player 2. We can't take from the discard pile until some of the initial melds have been played. So one of the strategic elements you're going to have to consider here is going to be you can make what's called a canasta if you have a 7 cards of the same amount. So 7 9s would be a natural canasta. Remember, there's only 8, which means it's kind of difficult to come up with this naturally, but it's worth more points if you do. In the meantime, you have wild cards which can help you get there. 2s and jokers are wild card, and you need to meet this 50-point initial meld. Well, we're going to say that the 9s here we're going to go ahead and lay these down. So I'm going to move this down a little just so it can be seen. And what you do is, as Team B, you've now made, like this 2, an initial canasta. So notice you drew a lot, and you're welcome to, as you play any other melds that you'd like. So you can also play your jacks here. Make sure you can see them all. You can play your jacks here. So you've made your initial 50 points. It is only after Team A here plays their initial meld that the discard pile can come into play. But you're going to be keeping track of what's in the discard pile. So now that you've made your initial melds, you have to think about what to discard. So you don't have a lot of information here. So let's say you decide to get rid of the 4 because it's not worth as many points. So you've got your 2 cards here. Play moves on to player number 3. They draw an 8. Now an 8 they see hasn't been played just yet. And even though they have a 9, they can't play it off. So we are going to consider what works here in order to make your own meld. So let's say what you decide to do is play your 4s here and use the Joker, which can count as a part of your initial meld, and you only need 50 points. So now both sides have made their official melds. Now what I'm going to do is, since it's a team-based game, I'm going to move this meld over here. You can either keep it on your side or the other, but some people like to organize their melds. Sorry, I forgot to include this queen over here. So now Team A has a meld as well, which means that either, in this instance, player 1 and player 3 can add to this meld to make a canasta, or now you can have, for Team B, if there are any 9s, which you see they can't, or jacks, which you see they can't, but you can play wild cards. Here's an important thing about the way that wild cards work. You cannot have more cards in wild cards than you do the natural card you're trying to play a canasta off of. So if I had had a 4, a 2, and a Joker, that wouldn't have worked. I also can't even it out. So I have to make sure that it is always more, even though it's going to be now mixed. So we've got our 3 here, which I'm going to go ahead and play. And I'm playing it over to the side because technically it's freezing the deck. What's so important about freezing? More on that in a second. A little bit more about the history of this game, because we still have to go back to Kongkweon and Kanhu. Now, Kanhu is descended from Mahjong, the tile-based game as I referred to previously. However, the idea of drawing and discarding tiles, that is one of the clear borrowing of rummy in the Mahjong world. Kongkweon had less of a discarding method, but more of a thievery-based method. So even though they have 2 slightly different origins, they started melding into a common theme. Well, how did it end up in the United States? More on that in a moment. Okay, the 3s. It's time we talk about those. 3s function as a temporary freeze for most things. So a black 3 prevents, for 1 turn, somebody taking the discard pile. Now that we've opened up, people can, with the top card, if they can make a meld, can take up the entirety of the discard pile in order to make their melds. So player 4 is blocked from doing so, so they're going to draw. And they can't play anything off of these 9s. They can't play anything off of these jacks, but they can also start melds of their own if they so wish. So we'll say, we'll pop the 7 here. And we're going to use the aces and these jokers. So we'll move them over here. And this is, of course, without knowing that an ace can be played there. Oh, let's see, what would we discard? So let's say that we discard that 7. Doesn't have any interest to us. Now we are back good to go. So player 1, they can't make a meld off of a 7 because they don't have 3, so they're going to draw. Here's a 6. They can play off of the 4. So here's where we get into the next segment of the game, is where it's a team-based game, where now each side is trying to figure out a way to generate the largest number of melds. One last important element is the red 3. The red 3 on its own is a special card that you want to go ahead and place down. It's worth 100 points on its own. So if we're going to 5,000, having the red 3 is going to be super important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and keep playing through now that we've established these initial melds. We're going to keep drawing, and then we will get to the end of the game and I will show you scoring. Hold on a second. I fast forwarded a tad bit because after you get the melds and after you start working on the discards, you simply have to get to this point for the end game. 1 canasta has to be made as a minimum for somebody to go out. In player 2's instance, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is a canasta. So what you would do at this point is make it into a nice neat little pile, letting you know that the canasta is finished. And at this point, they had only 1 card left, the queen. So I referred previously to points, and I went ahead and tabulated. This is an insanely early time to go out. But as soon as a canasta is made and you lose your hand, you go out. So here's how the points end up getting calculated. So Team B is going to get 100 points just for going out. It is a mixed canasta because there was at least 1 wild card used that was worth 300 points. If it had been a natural canasta of all 7 cards, being a 9, it would have been worth 500 points. So sometimes it's just point differential, but let's say they wanted to go out and they wanted to just end this round. They would do so by finishing canasta, going out. So the 300, so I went ahead and tabulated it out here. Going out is worth 100 points. The 9 mixed canasta is worth 300 points. They had 3 aces that were worth 50 points each and 2 jokers. 20 points each for the ace and 2 jokers worth 50 points each for a total of 160. And then 3 jacks, so you're still counting even if you didn't get a canasta. They're worth 10 points each for a total of 30. Minus, after the 590, whatever was left in their hand. So there were 2 2s. So this is subtracted, that's 40 points. In the king through 8, those were worth 10 points each, so there was 10. And there were 4 in the 4 through 7 variety. That's worth 20 points. So they scored, after having subtracted for what was left in their hand, what in rummy we would call dead wood, that is worth 520 points. So they're a tenth of the way there. Meanwhile, for Team A, they had a lot going on here, as you were starting to be able to tell, and they added more because they were able to pick up that discard. They were able to start making a lot of melds in initial starts. So that might have been strategy-wise why player 2 decided to go ahead and go out, because these all collectively aren't worth a crazy lot of points. So they had 3 10s, that's worth 10 points each, 4 6s, 5 points each for a total of 20, 4 5s, 5 points each, for a total of 20. They almost had a canasta on 4s, so they had 5 4s and then a joker, so that was worth 70 points. The red 3, which was worth 100 points on its own, and then the 3 8s, as the king through 8 part, it would be worth 30 points for a total of 250. So not terrible, not great. What hurts them is the remainder discard. Having all these kings and queens in their hand collectively between the two of them really hurts. So a black 3 on its own is worth 5, and then they only had 2 4 through 7s, which would be worth, I'm sorry, I missed put down there, and that would be worth 10 points. So I'll subtract another 5 here in a moment. But the rest, there were 8 cards left in K through 8. So it's a minus of 80 points. So let me fix that here. That's 10. So the score right now at the end of this one hand would be 520 to 155. At this point, you would put all the cards back in order, shuffle up again, deal again, play continues. And yes, you can have negative point totals. So you continue on this way all the way up until somebody has 5,000 points. And that is how to play a hand of canasta. How did these two games end up becoming so similar, combined, and brought over to the United States? Well, that's simple. Rum. Even though rum was imported from India in certain contexts, it was brought over as an English game, becoming the game of rummy. It got its definition from actually odd or strange, indicating the way in which it was played. So it came over as a popular pastime game as you were going across the ocean, and took well into the 19th and 20th century to become a more respectable game. It was often known as a lower class game before becoming a higher class game into the mid 20th century. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. Now, we're not done with this game yet. There's a whole level of strategy that I want to impart upon you for next episode. So come back next week where we cover this game in even more depth. See you next time.